We're back here on Daf Lamed Gimel Amid Beis. We began just yesterday, and we're talking about the Seder Hamaroch. Now let's just find the place. We're up to Hatovas Chamesh Neros. And you'll see this approximately 10 lines down from the top. We'll count exactly 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. The last word in the 9th line, Hatovas Chamesh Neros, Kodem Lidam Hatomid. And then Dam Hatomid, Kodem Latovas Shtei Neros. So why is there such a seder in which we start with Hatovas Chamesh Neros, then we go on to the Avodas Hadam of the Tamid, and then we do the Hatova of the last 2 Neros, but we wedge the Avodas Hadam of the Korban Tamid in the middle of Hatovas HaNeros, separating the 5 with the 2. My time. What's the basis for such a thing? Abaye, let's derive it from the pasuk. Again, we're going back to Vayikra Vav, and the pasuk says Baboker, Baboker. Now we said, if you remember our discussion of yesterday, that Baboker, Baboker is a reference to what's called Shnei Gizrei Eitzim, because the pasuk says Ubir Oleh HaKohen Eitzim Baboker Baboker. So that's the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim. However, Abai points out the Lo Tzrichi. These 2 words, Baboker Baboker, are redundant as far as Shnei Gizrei Eitzim is concerned. We know that we begin with Shnei Gizrei Eitzim, and that's even before the Dishon Mizbeach Apnimi. Why? Because we have halacha that the Eitzim are machshirin haktores, that we need the Eitzim in order to set up the Ketores. So if that be the case, we understand very well, even without these extra words, that we start with the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim before the Dishon Mizbeach HaPnimi, and the Eitzim are machshirim es haktores. So Shadinu Lahacha, why did the Torah therefore feel compelled to place in the context of the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim the 2 words Baboker, Baboker? And we're going to use these 2 words Baboker, Baboker to reflect on the avoda of the Talmid together with Hatovas HaNeros. Chad, 1 Baboker, is going to teach us, again, we're talking about the Gizrei Eitzim, Shadye Latovas Chamesh Neros. We're going to assume that the first word Boker reflects on Hatovas Chamesh Neros. And what does it teach me about Hatovas Chamesh Neros? Deliktime Lidam Hatomid. That the word Baboker means early, in this case, to precede the Dam HaTomid. So first we have the Hatovas Chamesh Neros, then we have the Dam HaTomid. And V'chad, what do we do with the other Baboker? In the Parsha of Shnei Gizrei Eitzim. Is Shadya L'Dam HaTomid. What does that mean? that Baboker always tells you earlier, ala boker, as we say. And now we're going to use this word, the second Baboker, to reflect on the Damat Tomid, that it should come earlier. Earlier than what? Earlier than Atovas Haneros. What do you mean? We use the first Baboker to teach me that Atovas Haneros comes before the Tomid. And the answer is these two Babokers are telling you that both Hatova and Dam HaTomid both have a din of Akdama, of being mocked in them, Baboker. And that's going to force me to assume that the Dam HaTomid has to be wedged as a sandwich in the middle of that Tovas Haneros, because we're going to use one Baboker to tell me that Tovas Haneros comes before the Dam HaTomid. We're going to have another Baboker to tell me that the Dam HaTomid comes before that Tovas Haneros. How is that possible? Unless we insert the Dam HaTomid in the middle of that Tovas Haneros. The Niktame La Tovas Shtei Neros. Again, we still don't know why we divide it in that way, 5 and 2. And the Gemara says, Chad, the first Baboker, Shadye La Tovas Hanero, Chamesh Neros, the Liktame L'Dam HaTomid. Why? The Hacha, when it comes to Tovas Haneros, Tlosa. The Torah repeats the word Baboker not twice, but thrice. It says twice, Baboker, Baboker, Bahativo Es Haneros Yaktirenu. And that's in the 30th chapter of Shmos. So we already have two Bokers with regard to Tovas Haneros, that's explicit. And now we have the Baboker in Vayikra in the context of the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim. And we said that there's no way of justifying that Baboker because we already know Shnei Gizrei Eitzim, the Kedima. It must be that it's coming for Tovas Shnei Neros. So that gives the third Boker for Tovas Shnei Neros, for Chamesh Neros. For Hacha, however, in the case of Dam HaTomid, Trey, we only have the word Baboker twice. That's at the end of Sefer Shmos in Perek Tes. The pasuk reads, "V'yasakeves achad taseh baboker." We're very familiar with this, and we read it every day in the Korbanos. Now, we said Trey. Where's the second Baboker? The answer is the second Baboker is in the parsha of Shnei Gizrei Eitzim in Vayikra Perek Vav. That's the second Baboker, and that's referring to the Dam HaTomid. Shadi L'Dam HaTomid, that second Baboker we're going to apply to the Dam HaTomid, the Nikmes. So it gives me a din of Kedima, Latovat Shtei Neros for the last 2 of the 7 Neros. Afal Gav the Hacha. Here in the case of Din HaTomid, where it says Baboker, it's Trey. For Hacha, and here in the context of Shnei Gizrei Eitzim, Hatovas Haneros, again, it says Baboker, twice Trey. So now we have 2 Babokers in the parsha of Hatovas Haneros, and that was the pasuk Baboker, Baboker, Bativos Haneros. Now we have 2 Babokers in the Talmud. But now we're going to apply a new principle called Mechaper Odif. What gives me the right to say that there's a din of Kedima of Talmud over Tovas Haneros, which is going to reflect itself in the last 2 Neros? After all, we have 2 Talmuds, 2 Babokers in the parsha of Hatovas Haneros. We have two babokers in the parsha of Dama Hatomid. It's an equal teku. What gives you the right to say no? The Dama Hatomid has to come before the Hatovas Shtei Neros. The answer is a new principle called Mechaper Adif. In other words, a carbon gets a certain priority over Hatovas Haneros, because Hatovas Haneros is not a carbon. And how does the Gemara express itself? What word does the Gemara utilize to indicate that the carbon, in this case the Tamid, is Mechaper Adif? Mechaper is chosen by the Gemara to reflect on a carbon as opposed to Neros, because every carbon is a Mechaper. Now it's interesting because we're talking about a carbon ola tzibur, meaning the tamid is an olas tzibur, but nevertheless the Gemara calls it a mechaper. When the tzibur brings this carbon ola on a daily basis, it effectuates an atonement for the entire tzibur, and that puts it on a higher level than neros adlok. Shemechaper adif, because ola is mechaper. A carbon ola is mechaper for both assays and los assays. And certainly in the case of an essay which is connected to the los assay. In other words, hatamid carbon olahi va'ola mechaper sal essay via los assay. What kind of los aseh? We don't know that a carbon ola is mechaper on a los aseh. But the answer is there's something called a los aseh that's connected to an essay, otherwise known as a lav hanitak liessay. And a lav hanitak liessay is included in the kapara power of the tamid. V'adifa me'atovas haneir she'ena bo lechaper. So again, in the divine wisdom, we don't know why the first 5 neros, Hatova precedes the Tamid, because now you're telling me that Tamid is Mechaper and Eris is not a Mechaper. You're going to achieve a Din Kedima and give that covet, that glory, that respect to the Tamid insofar as it precedes the Hatova Shtei Neros, but you're not willing to go as far as beginning the Tamid even before the Hatov of Chamesh Neros, because of the extra Babokim. Amalei Rav Popol Abaye, after this whole long presentation of Abaye, Rav Pop asks him, why are you taking Baboker and deriving from it Hatova Shtei Neros, that there's an additional Hatova of the other Chamesh Neros? That's going to teach you that we're going to give a Kedima to Dam HaTamid for the 5 Neros. Is Ema, why not say the following? Let's interpret these words in a different way. These Baboker. Maybe Chad, one Baboker, is Shadye Ledishun Mizbech HaPnimi. Let's say that the word Baboker is telling you Hidima, meaning where do you start the entire day of the Avodah Mikdash? Start it with Dishun Mizbech HaPnimi. And that's teaching us the Nekadme Ledam HaTamid. And we were always bothered by this halacha that Dishun HaMizbeach should come before the carbon tamid. I mean, it's to evaluate them in one context and one breath is very difficult. But the Gemara is now arguing that the word baboker, which in the parsha of Shnei Gizri Eitzim is superfluous, we're going to be matil, we're going to push it onto Dishan HaMizbeach. Again, we're talking about the Mizbeach HaPnimi. And the Dishan Mizbeach HaPnimi should now come before the Tamid, the Dam HaTamid. The Hacha Tlasa, Ve'Hacha Tre. In the case of Mizbeach, of the Dishan of Mizbeach HaPnimi, we have 3 times the word Baboker. We have 2 times in the Pasuk, Baboker behetivo es haneros yakti reno. And another Baboker with regard to the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim. So in the context of Damat Tamid, we saw that the Pasuk says Baboker twice. Once in the Parsha of the Tamid, it says as Hakeves Echad Taseh Baboker, and another Baboker we borrowed from the extra superfluous Baboker in Gizrei Eitzim. V'chad, what are we going to derive from these Babokers? The extra Baboker in the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim, Shadi L'Dam HaTamid. So we now have an extra Baboker in Dam HaTamid besides the local Baboker in the Parsha of the Tamid. And what is this extra Baboker in the Parsha of Dam HaTamid teaching you? In the Parsha of Gizrei Eitzim teaching you? The Nikdom Latova Shtei Neros. The Afal Gav the Hacha Tre. Even though with regard to Dam HaTamid we only have 2 Babokers. The Hacha with regard to Atovas Chamesh Neros Tre. We have twice, as we explained. And therefore we have a toss-up, an equal teku. But we already said that Dam HaTamid comes first because Shemechaper Od. So again, let's just summarize Rav Papa's objection to Abaye. Why do you tell me, Abaye, that we're going to take the extra Baboker and we're going to give a Kedima to what? To the Dam HaTamid, and that's going to express itself in the last 2 Neros. Why not suggest that 1 Baboker is for the Dishan Mizbeach HaPnimi, that the Dishan Mizbeach HaPnimi, the Mizbach HaZov, should come before the Dam HaTamid? And what are you going to tell me? That Dishan Mizbeach HaPnimi has 3 times Baboker. Right, twice it says Baboker, Beitiva Saneros, and now we're borrowing one of the Babokers. The first of the Babokers we're borrowing from Gizrei Eitzim. And Hacha Trey, but here with regard to the Tamid, we only have 2 Babokers. One is Hakeves Echad Taseh Baboker, and then we're going to borrow the second Baboker from Gizrei Eitzim. And 1 Baboker, which is the second one in Gizrei Eitzim, is going to give Kedima to the Dam HaTamid. And therefore, what are you going to tell me? That this Kedima before the Atovas Chamesh Neros. Because again, we're talking about Dishan Mizbach HaPnimi first, based on the extra Baboker here in Gizrei Eitzim. And the second Baboker is going to teach me Kedima for Tamid. So therefore, why are you telling me that the Baboker here in the extra Baboker here in Gizrei Eitzim is going to teach me after that Tovas Chamesh Neros? Maybe not. And again, as we said before, that Damat Tamid has that special status of Mechaper Od. So Abai responds, Im Kain, if we're going to be marked in the Damat Tamid even to the first 5 neros of Hatova, is Afsuke B'mai Mafsikina Le. We need a hefsek between Hatovas Chamesh neros and Hatovas Shtei neros. There's got to be some sort of a mafsik. And we thought that it would be the Tamid. Now, this Gemara here of Afsuki b'mayas mafsikina, that's based on the sugi that we had back on Daf Lamed Gimel Lamed Al. And that is that the Torah of the Ketores is going to be mafsik between the 5 neros of Hatava and the last 2 neros of Hatava. That's against Abba Shol. Again, we're not going to go through that sugi again right now. So the Gemara says, Abai argues that we need some sort of mafsik between the 5 neros and the 2 neros. And if that be the case, we want to be makdim the Tamid. Hanicha, says the Gemara, l'reish lakish, the Omar lama mativin, v'chozrinu mativin. We do our tov on part of the neros, and then we do our tov on the rest of the neros. Kidei lahargish kol ha'azara kula. We want to make a loud noise over the mahalach b'psios v'kol tchilas avodos. Shopping. Now the Gemara says, I understand it very well. What does that mean? I understand it very well. Shopping. He says the following: Ain't tzarich lahafsik b'dama tamid bein hatovas haneros. So Abaye is sort of like arguing against himself. And he's saying, and if you'll counter-argue, and you'll say we don't need this hefsek between the beginning and the end of Hatovas HaNeros, okay, you can make that argument according to Reish Lakish. Why? Because Reish Lakish only has this separation between the beginning of the Hatova and the end of that Torah, of that Tova, because of this idea of Kedela Hargish Kol HaAzara Kula. So Shapir means now you're right in your kasha, and you can object. We don't need a hefsek wedging the Talmud between Hatovas HaNeros in the middle. After that Hatovas HaNeros, the Kohanim leave the Heichal, and they'll come back to the Heichal for another 2 Neros. Now you're right, there's no need for a mafs. Elul Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says the reason why we split the Hatovas HaNeros is not like Rish Lakish because of Kedela Hargish, but rather because it says regarding Hatovas HaNeros Boker. And how does Rabbi Yochanan understand Boker? Chalkeu l'shnei bekarim. Set up in the Boker 2 different zmanim for Hatovas HaNeros. And those 2 different zmanim will require a mafsik between the 5 Neros and the 2 Neros. Is Michael and Meimar. How can you possibly suggest and argue that the Dama Tomid has to come before the Hatovas Chamesh Neros? There's no avoda that's going to be mafsik in the Hatovas Haneros. Al Koch, we have no choice, but we're going to have to say Shahayu mafsikin beineim b'dama tzipur, b'dama tomid. So therefore, Abaya argues based on Rabbi Yochanan and his understanding of Aboker of Chalkei L'Shnei B'Karim, that certainly we need to be mafsik with the Dama Tomid between the beginning of that Tovas Haneros and the end. We cannot be mocked in the Dama Tomid to the Tovas Kamesh Neros. Gemara now asks another kasha. Amalei Ravina L'Rav Ashi, hi Baboker, the Eitzim. Mimiyater, you've been assuming all along that the two words Baboker in the parish of Shnei Gizri Eitzim are superfluous. Mimiyate, are they really superfluous? We need the pasuk Baboker here with regard to the din of Shnei Gizri Eitzim. Why? Dika Amar Achmana Nikdemu Lemarocha Shniya Shel Ketores. So remember, we had the Gizrei Eitzim, Shnei Gizrei Eitzim, and we had a separate Marocha to burn the Ketores. How do we know which comes first? So we established that based on the halacha of Kedima, we need to be mocked in the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim before the Aktores, or the Marocha Shniya of Aktores. And from whence do we derive that conclusion? There must be an extra word Baboker in the parsha of Shnei Gizrei Eitzim that gives Shnei Gizrei Eitzim the Kedima over Harocha, over the Marocha Shniya of the Ketores. Amalei, so Rav Ashi responds to Ravina, Lav miokimna olea v'lo al chaverta, Michlal de Isa lechaverta. This is a reference to the Gemara back on Amud Aleph, that we set up Marocha Shniya as coming before the Seder Shnei Gizrei Eitzim. And we derive that from the Marocha Gedola in Vayikra Vav. It says, Ubir Oleha, emphasize the word Aleha Kohen Eitzim Baboker, that the Seder Shnei Gizrei Eitzim is Aleha, which means on the Marocha Gedola, V'lo Chaverta. But not on the second Marocha that we light a pyre for the state, for the burning of the Ketores. So from the fact that we need a pasuk to exclude, Shalo Yaniach al Marocha Shniya, is Michlal, we have to derive from this, the Isa lechaverta, that at the moment he's setting up the Gizrei Eitzim on the Marocha Gedola, he already has the Marocha Shniya, and he's going to put the Eitzim on the Marocha Shniya. Because otherwise, why did the Torah have to be Mamayit Marocha Shniya, that he shouldn't put the Eitzim on top of the Marocha Shniya, but Shas Seder Gizrei Eitzim, Shnei Gizrei Eitzim, Adayin Ein Marocha Shniya. So we can't say that Baboker is coming to teach us that Seder Shnei Gizrei Eitzim come before the Marocha Shniya of Ketores. That's impossible. And therefore it's redundant, and it's miyutar lahatil bein latovas haneros uledama tomid. Okay, then, so we'll make a note of where we got up to here on Daf Lamed Gimel Amid Beis, and we're up to Maishna. Okay, let me wish you a wonderful day.